everyone. I'm Shaifali Singh and I am a transformation coach. I welcome you all to our new series on talent empowerment, where we will connect with industry experts on the changing landscape in the talent management within various sectors. We will also talk about growth opportunities, what one can expect, what are the critical factors that you can leverage, and what are the potential challenges that would help you build lucrative careers in your field of work. With that, let me introduce our expert for today, Mr. Vikram Kamath. Vikram is a business consultant with over 4 years of consulting experience, backed by 17 years of leadership experience in the Indian and global markets. Vikram works with clients across growth, strategy, business development, as well as strategic market research in varied sectors. In his role as a consultant, he focuses on the engineering and core sectors. Vikram is an alumnus of NIT Calicut and the Indian School of Business, Hyderabad, and he devotes his personal time in connecting with nature and contributes to agricultural activities at their coffee estate, the Tea Shop in Kurg. Hello, Vikram. It's a pleasure having you here.
Shaifali, thank you for that great introduction. And it's been a long journey, and it's extremely humbling to be with you and sharing insights on talent empowerment. And I'd be glad to share all that I have learned through my journey. And I would be happy to understand what it is that you would want us to share with our viewers today.
Absolutely. So Vikram, having 17 years of experience in the core sector, I'm sure you've witnessed a lot of change. How would you describe the changing landscape, especially with respect to talent acquisition? And what would be those key essential skills for success?
That's a very wide. It's a question with a lot of implications, and I'll try and draw from my experience, which has largely been in the engineering and the core sector. But I think a lot of these trends and a lot of the changes which we're seeing in the landscape are fairly uniform across sectors. So it would be safe to see these as portable changes. I think one of the biggest changes which we're seeing happening is that things are increasingly becoming multidimensional from what was earlier unidimensional. What I mean by this is if we look at typically when one starts off your career, there were for each sector there's a given input stream. So for example, you would say an engineer would go on to join the manufacturing industry or into IT software. You would say a CA a finance graduate would become a CA, a sciences graduate would go into research. So I think some of these things are fairly straitjacketed, but we see this has evolved significantly, and because companies are now no longer just making products or services, it's about people are talking about value. So earlier when one was just selling a product, now for example, if I was a company which was making refrigerators. You were just selling refrigerators earlier, but tomorrow you're selling value, which is the freshness of what you store in the refrigerator. So I think this is the way industry is changing. So what this calls for is the talent acquisition is becoming increasingly varied. You see people from not just the engineering sector, but also people from sciences, people from maths, statistics, people from humanities. A lot of varied input streams are coming together and going to work in a certain industry. This is something which is increasingly interesting, and I think it's good for the youngsters of today that one can study what one enjoys and still aspire for a career in something else. I think this is something quite interesting. And another change which one sees is there's a lot of variety in what one does. So earlier, if one would start off your career in the engineering sector, you would either be on the shop floor or you would be in sales or you would be. So it was a very very well defined what you would do. But increasingly, one sees that the elements, various elements coming into the same. So a shop floor supervisor or a shop floor manager is now increasingly becoming more and more responsible for the team which he is working with, for the machines under their control, for the materials under their control. So I think that way it's becoming much more varied in terms of what one does. And also a lot of these stereotypes which were there, be it gender stereotypes or what a specific job entailed, a lot of these stereotypes are getting broken down. So one sees a lot of diversity in the type of people going into a specific sector, as well as the sort of work which happens in a sector. So a simple example is one would see that anyone joining the manufacturing sector was expected to be a mechanical engineer and would work on machines. But today you see people from an electronics background, or the level of automation which is happening, the level of digitization which is happening. So you see people from other streams like computing, you see people from electrical and electronics joining. So I think these barriers are breaking down. One would think earlier that areas like design, quality, these were more amenable to women, and men would be on the shop floor, but we see this getting inverted. So a lot of these things are getting inverted, and it's quite heartening to note that that things are working better and more efficiently now with all of these barriers breaking down. So I think this is a change which one can see in the landscape. And from a future talent pool perspective, I think it's quite good to see that, like I said, the future talent pool is one which is going to become increasingly diverse. And also, earlier you were more in an individual contributor role. It was more of a command and control philosophy, but now we're moving towards matrix organizations. Increasingly, depending on your role, you may be required to deliver remotely. You're working in part of large teams. So the need to collaborate is much more. So I think this is someone who's able to collaborate, someone who's able to adopt. We see them doing much better in the future talent pool. And last but not the least, I think while the future talent pool allows you a lot of freedom, I think one would still fundamentally need to choose. Do you want to be a generalist versus do you want to be a specialist? So I think the future talent pool is going to be a mix of generalists and specialists working together to deliver value. So it's quite amazing to see the changes over the last few decades, and I'm sure if you ask me the same question 5 years later, my answer is going to be different. So things are changing quite fast.
Absolutely, Vikram. And those are some very interesting insights. Growing up when I was in school and when we were asked to choose subjects, we didn't really choose subjects on what we liked or what we wanted. We chose on what kind of employment would those subjects lead to. And it didn't really matter if he really had an interest in the subject per se, but it was more about, would this lead to a better employment? Would this have more career opportunities in the future?
I think, like you rightly pointed out, employability was seen as the end outcome of education, which that link is breaking down. So I think it's in the right direction that one gets educated and then uses those skills to see what the one wants to best use those skills.
So Vikram, I'm really curious to know how your journey has been, and what, according to you, are the key aspects that led to your success?
Like we just spoke, I come from a generation where the whole causality effect was there. So I wanted to be an engineer, so pursued education in sciences, and I did my engineering from the National Institute of Technology in Calicut. I did mechanical engineering, and I was one of the few who wanted to see what the mechanical world looked like as compared to the rest of my batchmates who went on into software and other various industries. So I spent a good amount of time with Saint-Gobain, which was my first employer. And I think it was a really good decision back then because Saint-Gobain really gave me the freedom to. It's an organization which believes in empowering employees from day one, and we were given a lot of freedom. Right as an engineer trainee, the level of respect and responsibility that one was given was quite interesting. And as a young engineer, one would get overawed by this, but I think it did help shape the direction of things to come. And I had the good fortune of working in various roles across regions in India. And after 4 years, I took a decision to take a break from my management education. I did this from the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. This was a breath of fresh air, and as we jokingly say on campus, it's like drinking from a fire hydrant. So it's a 1 year program, highly invigorating, people from different backgrounds. So your entire worldview crumbles down and you rebuild from scratch. So you go in as a person and you come out as something else. So I think an MBA is a life-changing experience for many, and it did the same for me. But post an MBA, I still chose to stick on to the core sector. I had a stint with ArcelorMittal in Europe. This is in steel. I came back, worked briefly with DLF in the real estate sector. And at one point, I took a decision to go back to engineering, which by then I realized was my core strength. And I went back to Saint-Gobain for a second innings. This was a it was a good decision to stick to my core. And it helped me to build further in terms of I explored roles in product management, I did roles in business strategy. I led a business P&L. I also worked on some greenfield projects for investments. So it gave me a flavor of different roles which one could do, but all within the overall umbrella of the engineering sector. So I think that really equipped me well for what I do today, which is where I add value to clients who are looking for areas of growth, how to streamline their business, how to basically set things up for success. So as a business consultant, I've been working these past few years, and when I look back, it is this journey of diversity which I had, which of course had the common theme that it was in the engineering space. But I think the fact that I was able to sample these different roles, different geographies, different companies, it gave me that confidence and that perspective, which today I bring to my work when I work with various clients.
Thank you for sharing, Vikram. I'm sure a lot of us would have a similar process for mapping out our careers. It was what was expected, the linear way of completing your graduation and then adding a couple of years of work experience and then going on to do an MBA. But a lot has changed in the recent years, and today the growth narrative is changing. So what would be your advice to ensure that there is continuous growth, especially in today's day and age where people are looking at careers from a different vantage point? And today's corporate world is dynamic, it's fast changing, and you need to run twice as fast, skill up continuously. So how does one continue to stay relevant and ensure success?
I would like to, start the answer with a qualificatory statement, a disclaimer. I would say continuous growth is a highly personal thing, and it means different things for different people. So my first piece of advice to all the people listening to this is, please have your own internal compass and your own benchmarks for what growth constitutes. Do not follow the rat race. But that said, let me give you a few practical insights into how one can achieve growth. So I think, as you rightly pointed out, growth is no longer linear, and trying to grow linearly is fairly time-consuming and effort-intensive. So, and I think, like we spoke earlier, we're not in a world which values linear growth. You are more valued as somebody who's multifaceted, who can look at the problem from multiple angles, who can come up with solutions which are not if we knew the solution, then there's no problem, right? So I think that's really the crux here. So one way of, I look at ensuring continuous growth through two ways. One, what I call as the co-curricular, and one, what I call the extracurricular one. So I think so the co-curricular one, to put it simply, is you already are part of an organization, which I presume would have. The organization is trying to grow, and the growth of its employees is the growth of the organization. So I think organizations today give their employees a lot of chances to try non-linear growth. If you're doing well, if you're seen as an employee with high potential, people give you opportunities to try different roles within the same company. My first advice would be to jump at these opportunities as you keep getting these opportunities, because it's like working in multiple startups, but within the safety blanket of your own company, right? So you get a chance to sample different roles, you get a chance to see what works, what doesn't work. So my first suggestion would be try as many different roles within the same company. Of course, make it a point to make sure that you stick at each role for at least a year or two. I would say 2 years is a good time to establish whether one can do well in a particular function in a role, learn all that the role has to offer. So I think this is important to make sure that there's variety in what you're doing within the same company. And at times, if the situation calls for it, I think you should be open to moving jobs, moving companies, moving geographies. I think the central theme here is be open to change and see how one can move with it, but keeping a certain direction in mind. And the second thing, what I mentioned, the extracurricular part, I think it's very important to have a life beyond what one does professionally. One adds a lot of value in the non-professional areas as well. And so I think here it's important to be part of groups of like-minded individuals who probably follow a theme which you're interested in, or follow a particular activity, or it can be a professional group, it can be a non-professional group, but ultimately it's important to have diversity of opinion. So it's important that one gets peers and mentors with whom you can bounce ideas, bounce thoughts off. So I think it's important to be part of a peer group and a mentor group, which helps to expose you to different facets of what's out there. So I think these are two ways in which one can ensure that one keeps growing in their career, and one keeps staying relevant. And I think what one needs to understand is growth is an outcome. So the end objective here is to learn, to grow, to learn and be relevant at what you're doing. So as long as that is consistently being achieved, as long as you're learning, as long as you're delivering value, I think growth is a natural outcome. So I think that happens independently. So I would say engineer your career in line with learning and delivering value. Growth will come automatically. You won't have a choice. People will ask you to grow. So I think that's a natural outcome.
These are some great insights, and I would like to explore more about this non-linear growth that you spoke about. And let's discuss this in more details in our next episode. I think it's such an interesting topic to talk about. One thing that comes to mind when I was hearing you speak is, in today's day and age, everything is uncertain, and we speak about this more than ever. And for example, we've seen the Great Resignation, and now we've been seeing a lot of layoffs happening. And while we do want to do the right things to ensure growth, because of these uncertainties, people may be losing the sense of direction. Given this scenario, what is your advice to the talent today?
As a starting point, I would say that uncertainty has always been there. It's just that our perception of uncertainty gets heightened at times like the Great Resignation or the various economic cycles which happen. Currently also we're seeing a bunch of layoffs happening across the world. So I think there are times when these perceptions of uncertainty flares up, but uncertainty is a part and parcel of life. So I would say that one way of safeguarding this is, to break it down, I would say there is at a principle level, one needs to decide, like I said, do you want to be a generalist or do you want to be a specialist? Because then the journeys differ based on that. So I think we've already spoken how if you are someone who aspires to be a leader, if you're someone who aspires to have a broader sphere of activities, then you need to keep exploring change. You need to be open to learn. You need to do all of that. And when it comes to being a specialist, I think it is, even when you dive deep into a specific sector, I think there are still different facets to. You may dive deep into, let's say, being a supply chain professional, or you want to be a finance professional. So there are multiple facets to that as well. I mean, as a finance professional, you could look at taxation, you could look at pricing, you could look at treasury. So there are different facets to finance. Similarly, there are different facets to supply chain. So what I'm trying to say here is, one needs to broadly keep in mind the direction which one is going, which is, let's say, for example, what worked for me was I wanted to be in the engineering sector. So that was my broad direction. So I was willing to sample things from manufacturing to steel to real estate. So it was broadly within a certain confine. So I liken this very much to driving along the highway. Let's say I need to go from Bangalore to Mysore. As long as I know the highway which I'm trying to take, I would still encourage you to take those few detours here and there. So some of these detours are interesting. You learn a lot. Some of these detours are disasters. They're adventures which don't have happy endings. But one still learns, whether it's a good detour or a bad detour. As long as you have sight of that highway where you need to get back to. So I think as long as you know that, I would say don't be worried with the small speed bumps here and there. Life has its ups and downs, and as long as you've been adding value to yourself, I think you're still eminently employable. So let's not get discouraged by a bad boss or a layoff or a change. I mean, your project gets shut down. I think these are part and parcel of life, and I think what doesn't kill you just makes you stronger. So just stay at it and stay the course is my suggestion.
Absolutely, Vikram. I agree with you completely. As they say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And some of the top skills that companies are also looking out for these days are adaptability and emotional intelligence. So one area that I would like to explore in our future conversations is the broad direction that you spoke about. And then having this broad direction and finding out what works for you, finding your niche, and then developing yourself in that. And I think what you also spoke about, either becoming a generalist or the specialist, I think those are areas that we would definitely like to explore in our further conversations. But for today, Vikram, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. We will continue our journey to explore these employability skills and how people can achieve their desired growth and success. Thank you so much for your time today, Vikram. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, it was great interacting with you, and I look forward to more sessions like this. Thank you.